A hush settles over stone streets, the air heavy with dust, and the faint scent of rain long overdue. This is hidden climate struggles of ancient cities, when once thriving civilizations faced brutal droughts, strange floods, and silent winters that reshaped daily life. You don't need to catch every detail, so let the images drift softly as you listen. Subscribe and tap the bell to join more calm journeys through forgotten history. Tonight, uncover how the climate quietly decided the fate of empires. You hear first the sound of wind, dry and restless, carrying dust across flat land. It whistles through reeds along a riverbank, rustling faintly like whispers of voices long gone. The air feels parched, the soil cracked beneath your feet. You breathe and taste grit upon your tongue. The horizon shimmers with heat, and before you, walls of clay rise, an ancient city built of mud bricks that themselves seem thirsty for rain. Pause here. Notice the way silence lingers between gusts, how sunlight presses heavy upon stone, how even shadows seem brittle. The city breathes slowly, like a creature waiting for clouds. This was Mesopotamia, a cradle of cities, the place where rivers shaped life, yet the same rivers could betray, swelling in floods, then retreating into trickles. When rain failed, when clouds passed without release, wells ran dry, cisterns emptied, and the silence of thirst settled. If you're still listening, notice how time feels slower already, stretched thin like shadows at dusk. You don't need to follow every detail, just let each image drift. The way dust drifts in light. You hear footsteps echo within narrow lanes. Women carry jars upon shoulders, their clay vessels hollow. They walk not with haste, but with weariness, as though each step repeats one taken before. At the city's edge, the well is low. Water lies far beneath, and ropes groan as buckets descend. The splash below is faint, less than before, more distant, more fragile, and so survival depended not on stone walls or bronze weapons, but on sky, on clouds, on rain that might or might not arrive. Kings wrote prayers upon tablets, offering sacrifice, pleading with gods of storm and flood. Yet prayers could not force rivers to rise. Pause again. Imagine clay tablets drying in sun, wedge-shaped marks pressed into them, brittle now, almost flaking. Hear the silence of scribes, broken only by scratching of stylus. Smell bitumen, tarry and sharp, sealing jars, sealing canals. Feel dust clinging to skin, fine and unyielding. When drought deepened, markets shifted. Grain rose in price, barley hoarded, bread smaller, families thinned, bellies hollow. Some sold livestock, others their land, some even their children, desperate for food. Drought was not only silence of rain, it was silence of voices fading, silence of homes abandoned, and still life continued. Rituals marked time, temples smoked with offerings, processions wound through streets, flutes played soft, though weaker than before. People clung to order, even as rivers shrank. If you're still listening, notice how repetition itself feels calming. The same prayers, the same footsteps, the same silence folded over again. You don't need to recall each phrase. Let them blur like carvings worn by sand. Walls of Mesopotamian cities leaned upon canals, but canals dried when silt clogged them, when rains failed, when rivers shrank upstream. Farmers watched furrows turn to dust. Goats grazed on stubble, thin ribs showing. Shepherds walked further, chasing water that slipped away. Yet still, cities endured. For a time, pause once more. Picture dawn, sky pale, sun red at horizon. Farmers walked toward fields with hoes, those soil cracks like pottery, their shadows stretch long, then shorten in glare. The air smells of dryness, of smoke from dung fires. Crows circle above, harsh in silence. If you're still listening, Notice how atmosphere folds in heat, dust, emptiness. You don't have to track every field, just let impression drift like haze upon horizon. Texts tell of kings who ordered canals rebuilt, who commanded new wells dug. They wrote of victories against thirst, yet victories were brief. For climate shifted beyond command, and cities, once proud, faltered. Archaeologists now uncover layers of abandonment, houses filled with dust, streets buried in sand. And so, under sun, cities cracked. Pause again. Imagine walking among ruins now, shards of pottery underfoot, silence pressing. No voices, no flutes, only wind. Stone foundations lie shallow, broken walls lean, desert stretches beyond. The air tastes of heat, endless and still. If you're still listening, notice how even absence feels steady here. Not cruel, not harsh, but folded into stillness. You don't need to hold each ruin. Let emptiness drift, like sand blowing. Scholars debate, yet one truth remains. Climate weighed heavy. Not alone. Wars came, rulers shifted, empires fell. But silence of rain, retreat of river, emptiness of well, these shaped destiny. For without water, city weakens, people scatter, life unravels. Pause once more. Picture child cupping hands to catch a trickle from jar. He drinks slowly, lips cracked, eyes wide. Behind him, mother watches, her face hollow yet steady. Around him, city still stands, but walls cannot feed thirst. Silence folds closer. If you're still listening, notice how fragility feels soft here. Not urgent, not sharp, but folded into hush. You don't have to keep each image. Let water itself drift like dream of rain. Mesopotamia was cradle, but also warning, where climate holds power beyond walls, beyond kings, beyond prayers. People felt it in lips, in bellies, in silence of fields. And you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Like horizon shimmering under heat, did those who carried jars to cracked wells sense city's fate? Or did they walk only step by step, rope creaking, bucket splashing faint, waiting, always, for rain that might not come? Asterisk, you hear first, a soft rustle of reeds bending along a riverbank, their tips trembling in a faint breeze. Water once flowed here in strength, wide and steady, carrying silt that fed whole valleys. Yet now the current is sluggish, broken into shallows where pebbles glint in weak light. The air smells faintly of damp clay and drying weeds, a scent both fertile and fading. Pause here. Notice the hush of this place. Once, carts rumbled across baked streets, wheels biting into dust. Children laughed as they carried baskets of fish, and merchants called out in languages now forgotten. But in this silence, you hear only the trickle of water growing thinner, and the sigh of wind carrying grains of sand across abandoned thresholds. This was the Indus Valley, where Harappa and Mohenjo-daro rose, cities laid in careful grids, drains carved with foresight, houses lined with brick. Its order seemed timeless here, as though water itself would always flow to fill cisterns, always flood fields with nourishment. And yet, skies shifted, monsoon rains faltered, then raged, then failed again. Rivers turned course, leaving stone and clay behind. If you're still listening, notice how repetition of water's silence drifts through you. The same trickle, the same emptiness, the same echoes stretched across centuries. You don't need to hold each city name. Just let the sense of fading water pass, like ripples losing shape. Imagine now the heat of a South Asian summer. The sun presses hard upon your shoulders, light glaring from brick walls. You squint into brightness, smell dust baked hot, hear the buzz of insects, and within the city, wells run lower. Women line up with jars, clay vessels resting against hips, their shadows sharp in mid-daylight. The rope creaks, bucket descends, splash, echoes faint, and water rises weaker than before. Markets whisper of change. Grain costs more. Fish caught in fewer numbers. Fields, once green, with barley dry into pale stubble. Families begin to leave, some following the river as it shifts. Others retreating into smaller villages where streams remain. Pause again. Picture doorways of brick houses left ajar, pottery vessels abandoned, beads scattered upon floor. Feel silence filling streets, a silence broken only by a cry of crow or a flutter of pigeon. The air tastes of emptiness, of departure, of waiting for footsteps that will not return. And still, rituals endured. Priests poured water upon altars, chanting toward skies. Farmers dug channels anew, guiding what little current remained. Children played in courtyards, their laughter brittle but real. 4 people clung to pattern, to rhythm, even as water fled. If you're still listening, notice how steady these patterns feel, repeating like breath. You don't need to trace each detail. Let it drift like dust blown across brick. Archaeologists find now what people left behind. Wells choked with silt, streets marked with cart tracks, hardened by heat, granaries still vast, yet empty of grain. Drainage systems clogged, no longer carrying flow. It was not sudden, not sharp collapse, but slow fading, like wick burning low. Pause once more. Imagine walking through Mohenjo-Daro as sun sets. Walls glow orange, shadows stretch long, breeze carries scent of river mud, drying. You hear no carts, no voices, only wind pressing between narrow lanes. In upper rooms, windows gape empty, once covered with mats. Silence deepens. If you're still listening, notice how time itself seems to thicken here, slow, unhurried, folded into dusk. You don't have to fix each ruin. Let them blur, like stars dimming behind haze. Climate shifted, monsoon weakened, rivers altered course. The Saraswati, once mighty, dwindled into streams, then dust. Whole cities followed its retreat. People did not vanish, but scattered. 2 villages, 2 fields, nearer surviving rivers, 2 new lives beyond grid of brick streets. Yet cities, once proud, became hushed shells. Pause again. Hear echo of footsteps on staircases leading to nowhere. Smell faint sourness of clay baked and crumbled. Feel coolness of evening pressing into walls that once held heat. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere folds steady around you. Silence, emptiness, hush. You don't need to memorize each river name. Just let sensation of fading current guide you. And so, the Indus cities remind us, survival rests not only on walls, nor even on skill of engineers, but on sky and rain and river that cannot be commanded. As water faltered, life shifted, slowly, gently, yet irrevocably. Pause once more. Picture child carrying jar too large for him, tilting it to catch final drips from sister. Hear faint splash. See hollow eyes of elders watching. Around them, city remains, yet spirit thins. Silence folds closer. If you're still listening, notice how calm fragility feels here. Not urgent, not harsh, but softened into stillness. You don't have to keep each image. Let them fade, like ripples smoothing into flat water. And you are left with reflection. Unresolved, hushed, when the rivers turned away. Did those who remained feel betrayal? Or did they simply follow in silence, step by step, waiting always for monsoon clouds that might not come? Asterisk, you hear first the slow call of a bird echoing through thick forest. The sound lingers, then fades into hush. Around you, trees rise tall, their roots twisted, their canopies tangled, their leaves heavy with moisture. The air is damp, almost suffocating, thick with scent of earth and moss. And yet, in this place of green abundance, stone pyramids rise. Their steps cut sharp against jungle, their tops reaching towards sun. But walk closer, and you notice something strange. Wells lie empty, reservoirs cracked, Carved gutters no longer channel water. Pause here. Notice how the silence presses. Once plazas rang with drums, with chants, with laughter of children playing. Now vines curl across steps, roots creep into cracks, and the sound of water is missing. No splash in cisterns, no trickle from gutters, only stillness. This was the Maya world. Cities vast, temples tall, writing carved into stone. Priests, red stars, kings wore headdresses of feathers and jade, and people filled markets with maize, beans, and salt. But the sky shifted. Clouds thinned, rains delayed. Years stretched long with dryness, and reservoirs that once shimmered with stored water sank into emptiness. If you're still listening, notice how repetition of silence folds around you. The same hush, the same absence of water, the same weight pressing from sky. You don't have to follow every name. Just let sensation drift, like mist hanging in jungle. Imagine now, standing within Tikal, one of the great Maya cities. You see temples rising sharp, their tops breaking canopy. The stone glows in sun, while shadows of trees stretch across wide plazas. The air smells of incense, once burned here, resinous and sweet, though now only faint traces remain. You hear insects buzzing, parrots calling, but no voices, no drums, no chants. Cisterns that once sustained thousands lie shallow. In times of drought, families lined up with jars, waiting for water carried from far. Fields dried, maize stalks thin, beans shriveled. Hunger whispered across households. Some families fled, searching for streams beyond. Others stayed, clinging to rituals, offering sacrifice, hoping for clouds. Pause again. Picture priests upon temple steps, arms raised to sky, incense smoke curling upward, curling into nothing. Hear the hollow echo of conch shell blown across empty plaza. Smell, sweat, and fear mingling with incense. If you're still listening, notice how ritual repeats like heartbeat, steady, slow, calming. You don't need to hold each detail. Let rhythm drift. Like chant, carried on wind, archaeologists read in soils what eyes cannot see. Layers of pollen show drought years, fewer maize grains, more weeds. Limestone caves hold traces of water levels dropping, stalagmites etched with centuries of change. For decades, rain faltered, not gone entirely, but weakened, uneven, unpredictable. And in this uncertainty, cities weakened. Pause once more. Imagine walking through Copan at dusk. Temples glow faint red, shadows grow long. Vines climb stone, bats stir from rafters. You smell damp leaves, hear rustle of monkeys. Since silence of plazas, too vast for force, now filling them. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere folds steady, like lull. You don't need to track each ruin. Let them blur, like carvings softened by rain. Kings commanded reservoirs, built deeper, wider. Engineers plastered surfaces, sealed cracks. For a time, water held. For a time, people endured. Yet, when drought stretched longer, even vast reservoirs failed, and hunger grew. Conflict followed. Wars broke between cities, each straining for survival. The silence of rain became clash of blades. Pause again. Hear distant echo of stone striking stone, warriors' cries faint in forest. Smell acrid smoke of fires set to fields. Feel emptiness in bellies, heaviness in hearts. If you're still listening, notice how struggle itself softens here, told not as urgency, but as distant echo, calming, fading, folded into silence. You don't have to carry each battle. Let them slip, like footprints erased by rain that came too late. Yet even as cities weakened, rituals did not fade. Priests carved glyphs upon stone. Kings staged ceremonies, offerings made to gods of sky. People clung to rhythm, to belief that balance could return. And in this way, life lingered, even as power cracked. Pause once more. Picture torchlight flickering upon temple walls. Shadows stretch long, chants rise steady, drums beat soft. The air smells of resin, thick and sweet. Above, sky vast, stars sharp, yet no clouds form. Silence of drought deepens. If you're still listening, notice how stars themselves feel calming, unchanging. You don't need to remember each constellation. Let them drift, light sparks glowing, then fading. And so, over centuries, cities emptied. Not sudden, but slow. Families left, priests prayed, rulers fought, until plazas grew quiet. Trees crept inward, roots cracked stone, vines curled. Forests swallowed temples, yet silence of drought lingered. Pause again. Imagine standing in jungle today. You brush vines aside, step upon moss-covered stair. Bird calls echo, insects buzz. You run fingers across stone carvings, worn but steady. You sense weight of silence, silence of drought that once pressed. Silence still folded here. If you're still listening, notice how calm absence feels. Not sharp, not cruel, but steady, like forest breathing around you. You don't need to hold each city name. Let sense of fading water guide you, and you are left with reflection. Soft, unresolved, drifting did those who walked plazas, carrying empty jars. No city's fate, or did they simply endure, day by day, waiting always for rain that might not come? Asterisk, you hear first the sound of hooves striking frozen ground. The rhythm is sharp, brittle, echoing faint across a plain whitened by frost. Breath of horses clouds the air in plumes, dissolving into morning haze. A line of soldiers walks along, cloaks wrapped tight, shields catching faint glints of pale sun. Their sandals slip upon icy ruts. Their footsteps crunch in snow hardened overnight. Pause here. Notice how silence presses between each sound. The wind cuts low across the plain, dry and hollow, carrying scent of smoke from distant campfires. You feel it sting your skin, smell faint resin of pine logs burning. Hear crackle far away. This was the Roman frontier, stretched north into lands where winters grew cruel. Beyond the walls of stone and fortresses of timber, cold deepened, and 4 soldiers stationed there. For settlers who followed, winter was not a gentle season, but a force that pressed into bone. If you're still listening, notice how repetition calms hoofbeats. Breath, wind, folding one sound into another. You don't need to recall each name of fort or river. Let them drift like echoes across snow. Imagine standing now at Hadrian's Wall. The stones rise gray, capped with frost. Beyond them, hills roll into mist, pale grass brittle under ice. Within the fort, soldiers gather near fires. You hear the clank of iron, the cough of cold men, the murmur of Latin voices. The air smells of smoke, sweat, and wool cloaks damp with melting frost. Rations were issued, barley, bread, salted meat. Yet, in deep winter, supplies ran low. Ships delayed by storms, wagons stuck in snow, granaries stretched thin. Soldiers chewed hardened bread, gnawed strips of dried meat, sipped wine turned sour. And still they watched, guarding lines that seemed endless. Pause again. Picture dusk falling. Torches flicker orange. Smoke rises. Snow glows faint in dying light. Hear creak of gates, distant howl of wolf. Shadows lengthen, cold deepens, silence folds in. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm of day turns slow, steady, unhurried. You don't have to remember each fort. Just let sense of frost and fire drift. For those living on frontiers, winter meant endurance. Farmers near forts covered fields with brush, protecting what grain survived. Sheep huddled close, cattle lowed in barns of timber. Children drew close to hearth, breath visible in dim light. Life narrowed into small tasks, mending sandals, patching cloaks, feeding fires. Yet climate weighed heavy not only on common life, but on empire itself. Scholars read in tree rings and ice cores traces of colder years, times when harvests shrank, when hunger pressed harder, when unrest grew sharper. Pause once more. Imagine forest of bare branches swaying, snow falling, quiet, muffling sound. You walk a long path lined with prints, human, deer, wolf, each fading as flakes cover them. Smell faint sweetness of resin, tastes cold upon lips. If you're still listening, notice how atmosphere folds steady like blanket of snow. You don't need to keep each fragment of evidence. Let them settle, like flakes soft upon ground. At times, even rivers froze. The Rhine, the Danube, boundaries of empire became hard with ice. Enemies crossed, raiders slipping silently in. Roman soldiers stood watch, their torches faint against darkness, their cloaks stiff with frost. Silence of winter was not peace, but tension. Breath held, waiting for crack of ice. Pause again. Hear distant crack, sharp and echoing. See figures moving across white expanse, shadows shifting. Feel cold, pressing deeper, air sharp, sky vast. If you're still listening, notice how even danger feels softened here, told, not in haste, but in echoes, gentle, fading, folded into stillness. You don't have to carry each raid. Let it slip, like breath in cold, and still rituals endured. Soldiers lit fires, offered wine to gods, prayed for warmth, for safety. Villagers gathered for feasts when they could, sharing bread, songs, laughter muffled in snow. For even in cold, life sought rhythm. Pause once more. Picture a small hut. Inside, fire glows, faint. Shadows flicker upon walls. Family huddles close, wrapped in wool. Outside, wind howls, snow drifts against the door. The air smells of smoke, of bread baking upon stone. Within, silence is heavy, yet warm. If you're still listening, notice how comfort folds within hardship. You don't need to follow each meal, each song. Let impression drift, like warmth glowing in dark dot. Climate was no single cause, yet it pressed like weight. Harsh winters strained supplies, thinned armies, weakened borders, and slowly, empire felt pressure, not sudden, not sharp, but steady. Pause again. Imagine dawn, breaking pale, frost gleaming, sky vast. Hear crows calling, wings beating above. Sea fort, rising gray, smoke curling. Sense hush of land stretched wide. If you're still listening, notice how horizon itself feels calming, endless, steady. You don't have to keep each fort's name. Let them dissolve, like mist rising, and you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did those who stood watch upon frozen walls sense empire's fragility? Or did they only feel cold in hands, hunger in belly, waiting always for spring that might not come soon? You hear first the muffled sound of water dripping, echoing faintly through stone. The aqueduct, once carrying clear streams from distant hills, has slowed, its channels frozen in sections, its arches frosted with ice. You stand in the hush of a Roman morning. The sky is pale, clouds heavy, air sharp with chill. Your breath escapes in mist, and cobblestones glitter with frost beneath dim light. Pause here. Notice how silence spreads across streets. Normally, carts would rumble, merchants would shout, fountains would sing. But in this season, voices are softer, movements slower. Hooves slip upon stone, wheels crunch on frozen ruts. You smell smoke drifting from countless hearts, sharp with pine resin, mixed with the faint sourness of damp wood burning to green dot. Rome was not built for such winters. Houses of stone and marble kept grandeur, but they also kept cold. Villas wide, with courtyards open to sky, let frost creep inside. Families gathered near braziers, huddling close, cloaks pulled tight, hands stretched over glowing coals. In poorer quarters, fires burned smaller, smoke choking narrow rooms. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm repeats, breath, drip, crackle, each folding into the next. You don't need to hold every street or aqueduct. Let them blur like mist across river. Imagine now walking through forum. Columns rise tall, their shadows pale in weak sun. Statues stand silent, their stone shoulders powdered with frost. The sound of sandals against marble echoes, sharp and hollow. Merchants pull cloaks tight, their goods fewer in winter. Grain costs more. Oil, once plentiful, is measured carefully. Bread smaller, lines longer. Pause again. Picture bakeries at dawn. Ovens glow, fire crackles, scent of bread drifts faint yet thin. Customers wait, breath misting, feet shifting upon cold stone. Coins clink softly, voices murmur. Silence pressing between each word. If you're still listening, notice how patience itself feels calming here. The long wait, the quiet exchange, the slow rhythm of survival. You don't have to fix each bakery's detail. Let impression drift, like smoke curling upward. Scholars tell us Rome endured periods of colder climate, when harvests shrank, when snow fell heavy, when even Tiber froze at its edges. Supplies from distant provinces slowed. Ships delayed, storms fierce, hunger pressed harder. Riots sometimes flared when grain ran short, voices rising in anger against chill and emptiness. Pause once more. Imagine torchlight in narrow streets at dusk. Flames flicker, shadows leap across walls. Smoke thickens, air sharp with burning pine. Hear murmur of crowd, restless, voices low. Sense tension folded beneath silence. If you're still listening. Notice how unrest itself feels softened here, told in whispers, not in shouts. You don't need to recall each riot. Let them fade, like sparks cooling in ash. Even emperors felt weight of cold. Records tell of rulers ordering extra grain, extra oil to calm hunger. Fires lit in public squares, warmth offered, though never enough. The eternal city glowed faint in night, but cold still seeped, pressing into stone, into bone. Pause again. Imagine night upon Palatine Hill. Palaces stand vast, windows dark. In chambers, braziers glow, casting orange upon marble. Curtains heavy with frost at edges. Slaves feeding coals. Nobles wrapped in wool and fur. The air smells of smoke and perfume mingled, strange sweetness within cold. If you're still listening, notice how contrast itself soothes luxury and struggle. Fire and frost, each folded together. You don't have to remember each palace room. Let them pass. It's like echoes across halls. For ordinary Romans, winters meant hardship. Children shivered in narrow rooms. Families crowded together, hands raw from cold. Fires built from scraps, broken crates, sticks gathered from streets. Smoke choked alleys, yet fires gave little heat. Hunger pressed, bread thinner, stew watered, voices softer. Pause once more. Picture mother stirring pot of lentils, steam rising faint. Children gather close. Hear soft clink of spoon, smell earthy scent of beans, feel a hush of hunger waiting. If you're still listening, notice how domestic rhythm calms, stirring, waiting, sharing. You don't need to fix each detail. Let scene drift, like steam dissolving. Winter pressed not only upon stomach, but upon spirit. Festivals carried joy. Saturnalia with lamps glowing, gifts exchanged, laughter rising. Yet, even in celebration, cold lingered. Fires burned, songs echoed, but outside, frost held streets in silence. Pause again. Picture lamps glowing in windows, voices singing faint, shadows dancing upon walls. Smell resin of pine torches, hear bells faintly, laughter softened. Beyond, alleys silent, frost pressing. If you're still listening, notice how joy itself feels fragile, steady, but thin, folded against silence. You don't have to carry each festival. Let impression drift, like song fading into night. Climate weighed upon empire's heart. When winters bit deeper, harvests thinned, supplies strained, unrest rose. Rome, grand and eternal, endured, yet not untouched. Frost upon stone was more than surface. It seeped, reminding even greatest city of fragility. Pause once more. Imagine dawn after snowfall. Form white, columns glowing, silence vast. Footsteps crunch, faint. Voices hushed, sky pale, horizon still. If you're still listening, notice how stillness itself soothes, endless, soft, folded into calm. You don't need to hold each marble column. Let whiteness drift, like snow upon stone, and you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did Romans walking frostbitten streets sense empire's slow strain? Or did they only feel hunger and cold, waiting always for spring that might not come soon enough? Asterisk, you hear first the brittle sound of branches snapping beneath snow. The air is sharp, cutting into lungs, carrying faint smell of pine and smoke. Across the horizon, fields stretch white, stubbled with stalks of grain left unharvested, frozen in place. Above, sky pale as stone, sun weak, casting little warmth. Pause here. Notice how silence fills the land. No hum of insects, no rushing of rivers, only crows calling harshly, wings black against whiteness. Footsteps crunch heavy, each sound absorbed quickly into still air. Not only Rome felt weight of harsh winters. Across ancient world, cities struggled. In Greece, marble temples shivered under snow. In China, rivers froze, silks stiffened in markets. In the Middle East, frosts killed olives and figs, pressing hunger into households. Climate left no empire untouched. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm calms frost, silence, breath, each folded together. You don't need to recall each empire's name. Let them drift, like snow falling. Imagine Athens in unexpected snow. Columns white, statues dusted, olive groves brittle with ice. Citizens wrapped in wool cloaks, fires burning within courtyards. You smell faint resin of olive wood, sharp and sweet. Hear crackle of flames, sea smoke curling against marble. Philosophers spoke less in open plazas, retreating to rooms warmed by braziers. Even thought seemed slowed by cold. Pause again. Picture marketplace in winter. Stalls fewer, goods scarcer. Fish stiff, bread thin, olives wrinkled. Voices low, coins exchanged with care. Air smells of smoke and salt, silence pressing between words. If you're still listening, notice how quiet exchange feels soothing, steady, patient, unhurried. You don't have to hold each market detail. Let impression drift, like smoke over marble dot further east. In China, winters pressed heavy. The Yellow River froze in places, its current trapped beneath glass. Farmers waited for thaw, granaries strained, families wrapped in hemp and wool. The air smelled of millet cooking, thin porridge shared sparingly. In palaces, fires burned hotter, but even kings could not command warmth into earth. Pause once more. Imagine Great Wall dusted with snow, stretching endless torches, glowing faint in distance. Hear howl of wind, see soldiers stamping feet for warmth, cloaks whipping in gale. Silence folds between flames. If you're still listening, notice how vastness itself calms horizon stretching endless, steady. You don't need to hold each battlement. Let them fade, like torches in storm dot in Middle East. Winters brought frost that killed blossoms. Olive trees brittle, figs withered, vines silent. Farmers watched with worry, harvests thinned, hunger whispered. Cities reliant on trade felt shortages. Merchants' voices hushed, caravans delayed by storms, silence of markets heavy. Pause again. Imagine caravans stalled in snow, camels huddled, drivers crouched by fire, breath clouding, smell smoke of dung fuel. Hear wind howl across dunes turned white. If you're still listening, notice how strangeness of snow upon desert soothes, unexpected, hushed, folded into calm. You don't need to follow each route. Let them vanish like tracks covered overnight. Climate was not steady. Winters shifted, some harsher, some kinder. But when cold deepened, people felt fragility. Fires built, cloaks mended, prayers whispered. Even emperors, even kings, could not banish ice. Pause once more. Picture family huddled in clay house. Fire glows faint, shadows long. Children wrapped in blankets, mother stirring pot of grain. Outside, snow drifts high against the door. Inside, warmth, fragile, silence deep. If you're still listening, notice how domestic rhythm feels calming, stirring, waiting, breathing. You don't need to remember each detail. Let scene drift, like steam fading. And so across empires, across centuries, winter pressed. It did not destroy alone, but it strained. Trade slowed, harvests thinned, unrest stirred. Cities endured, but always with memory of cold. Pause again. Imagine dawn breaking pale, frost glittering, torches dimming. Hear crows call, see horizon wide, silence vast. If you're still listening, notice how horizon itself soothes, endless, folded, calm. You don't need to hold each city's fate. Let them dissolve, like snow melting, and you are left with the reflection, soft, unresolved. Did those who shivered in marble villas, in clay huts, in wooden forts, sense climate's hand upon history? Or did they only feel cold in bone, waiting always for spring that might not come soon enough? Asterisk, you hear first the sound of rain, steady and endless, falling upon clay roofs and stone courtyards. It strikes cisterns, runs along gutters, fills channels that overflow. The air is heavy with moisture, carrying scent of wet earth, sharp and fertile. A river nearby swells, its current faster, louder, surging against banks lined with reeds. Pause here. Notice the rhythm of rain, a drum upon earth, upon water, each drop folding into another, a chorus without end. You feel the coolness of damp air, the way clothing clings to skin, the way shadows ripple in puddles spreading across ground. This was both gift and terror from Mesopotamian cities. The Tigris and Euphrates brought life, silt that fed fields, water that sustained barley, dates, figs. But when rains pressed too long, when snow melted too fast in northern hills, rivers swelled beyond banks. Floods swept fields, toppled walls, drowned livestock, and carried away houses of mud brick. If you're still listening, notice how repetition of water soothes, flowing, falling, flooding, each word a ripple. You don't need to recall each king's decree or each canal's name. Let them blur like reflections upon river. Imagine now a dawn after night of rain. The sun rises weak, hidden behind thick clouds. Streets are rivers, markets submerged. Boats drift where carts once rolled, their hulls knocking softly against stone. You smell wet clay, sharp and earthy, mingled with scent of reeds torn from banks. Voices call faintly, families climbing onto roofs, goods carried upon heads, children lifted high. Pause again. Pitch a ziggurat rising above water. Its steps slick, priests climbing, robes heavy with damp. Smoke rises faintly from altar fires struggling against rain. Chants echo, calling to God to sky and flood. Its voice is steady despite storm. If you're still listening, notice how ritual itself feels calming. Repetition of chant, of prayer, of hope. You don't have to keep each word. Let cadence drift, like smoke dissolving in rain. Archaeologists uncover layers of silt, thick deposits showing floods that reshape cities. Houses filled, walls buried, pottery left in mud. Texts speak of great floods, some remembered as myth, woven into stories of beginnings. Yet for those who lived them, floods were not legend, but life, a yearly risk, a sudden ruin. Pause once more. Imagine standing at city's edge, watching river roar, Logs and debris rush past. Animals struggle in current. The sound is endless, low and powerful, pressing into ears, into chest. Air tastes of mud and rain. If you're still listening, notice how sound itself folds steady, rushing, endless, like breath. You don't need to hold each image. Let water itself carry you. Kings commanded canals rebuilt, dikes raised, levees strengthened. Laborers dug through mud, hands raw, bodies soaked, voices chanting work songs. For survival meant bending water, guiding it, controlling what could not be truly mastered. Pause again. Picture line of men hauling mud bricks, stacking them high against flood. Hear splash of water against wall. Feel weight of damp clay. Smell sweat mingled with rain. If you're still listening, notice how labor rhythm soothes, lifting, stacking, repeating. You don't have to recall each task. Let sense of endurance drift like footsteps in mud, and still floods returned. Some years mild, others fierce. Families rebuilt again and again, patching walls, mending roofs, planting fields once more. For as much as rivers betrayed, they also gave. To live here was to endure both gift and grief. Pause once more. Imagine evening after flood. Waters recede slowly, leaving silt upon streets, fish stranded in pools. Children chase them, laughter echoing. Women gather debris, men repair walls. Air smells of mud, of smoke rising once more from fires. Silence softens, replaced by voices rebuilding. If you're still listening, notice how renewal itself calms silence, giving way to rhythm. Destruction, followed by life. You don't need to follow each recovery. Let impression drift like silt settling at bottom of pool. Floods shaped memory. Myths told of waters covering world, of boats carrying life, of God sending deluge. These stories were not distant. They were woven from lived fear, from nights spent upon roofs, from mornings walking through ruins. Pause again. Picture storyteller by fire. Children gathered close. His voice steady, smoke rising, shadows flickering. Outside, river quiet now, but memory still strong. If you're still listening, notice how stories soothe repetition. Rhythm.com. You don't need to hold each tale. Let them blur, like echoes fading. And so, Mesopotamian cities endured, always between rivers' gift and floods' grief. For climate pressed, not only in drought, but in excess. Water, too little or too much. Silence of dust or roar of flood. Both held power. Pause once more. Imagine dawn upon plain, river, gleaming silver, fields dark with silt, air fresh with scent of renewal. Farmers walk barefoot, planting seed into wet earth. Silence deepens. Steady.com. If you're still listening, notice how balance itself soothes destruction and gift folded together. You don't need to remember each flood. Let them drift, like ripples smoothing into stillness. And you were left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did those who built canals and preyed upon ziggurats feel gratitude or dread when river rose? Or did they only endure, waiting always for water that might bless or ruin? Asterisk, you hear first the low lap of water against banks, a rhythm sobbed, steady, like breathing. The Nile glimmers in early light, wide and calm, carrying faint mist upon its surface. Birds call faintly, wings brushing air. Reeds whisper, their stalks swaying, their tips bending. The air smells of wet silt, rich and dark, promising growth. Pause here. Notice how hush of river folds around you. Each sound, layered bird, call, lap of water, rustle of reeds, blending into calm. You feel cool dampness of morning air. See golden glow upon water. For Egypt, this river was lifeline. Each year, flood came, spreading water across fields, leaving silt fertile, black and soft. Without it, land would be desert, empty, silent. With it, crops grew, wheat, barley, flax, Cities flourished, temples rose, voices echoed across stone. If you're still listening, notice how repetition soothes. Water rising, falling, returning, cycle, endless, steady. You don't need to recall each dynasty, each reign. Let them drift, like reflections upon water. Imagine now a village along Nile, mud brick houses low, clustered near fields. Children laugh, splashing in shallows. Women carry jars balanced upon heads. Men check dikes, watching water creep across the plain. The air smells of clay walls, warming in sun, of fish drying, of smoke from dung-fuel fires. Silence is broken by life's rhythm, steady.com. But sometimes, rhythm failed. Some years, floods came to high, drowning houses, sweeping livestock, leaving ruin. Other years, waters rose to little fields, dried, grain shriveled, hunger pressed. The Nile was gift, yet also burden. Pause again. Picture priest in temple of stone, carving lines upon a wall, measuring flood with care. Hear scrape a chisel, echo in chamber, faint chant of prayer beyond. Smell incense, sharp and resinous, curling into shadows. If you're still listening, notice how ritual itself calms, steady, measured, repeated. You don't need to hold each record. Let impression drift, like smoke curling upward. Records etched in stone-marked floods. Kings praised for plenty, blamed for famine. People watched carefully. Too much, too little, both dangerous. For hunger meant unrest, silence in granaries, riots in streets. Pause once more. Imagine market in famine year. Stalls thin, baskets nearly empty. Bread smaller, coins exchanged with trembling hands. Voices hushed, air heavy with smoke and fear. If you're still listening, notice how hush itself soothes. Silence folded within struggle. Steady, calm. You don't need to recall each riot. Let them pass, like dust on breeze. Yet, even in struggle, Nile remained sacred. Hymns praised it, myths wove around it. People bowed to river as God, offering thanks, pleading for mercy. For life meant waiting each year, hoping water would rise just enough. Pause again. Picture dawn of flood season. Families gather, watching river swell. Children point, elders murmur, priests chant. Air smells of wet earth, sound of water, louder, deeper. Silence replaced by awe. If you're still listening, notice how awe itself feels calming. Vast, steady, folded. You don't need to recall each word of him. Let cadence drift, like current carrying reeds. In great cities, like Thebes and Memphis, floods marked rhythm of life. Granaries filled in good years, temples gleamed, statues raised. In poor years, silence filled streets, hunger hollowed voices. Kings ordered relief, but even their power could not summon rain to Ethiopian highlands, where Nile's floods began. Pause once more. Imagine Pharaoh upon throne, hearing reports. Officials bow low, voices soft. Maps unrolled, numbers recited. Yet outside palace, silence of hunger spreads. If you're still listening, notice how weight of rule softens here, told in whispers, not in haste. You don't have to hold each reign. Let them dissolve, like footprints in sand. Climate left traces still visible. Droughts recorded, famines remembered, uprisings traced to silence of river. For though Nile seemed eternal, it shifted, and people felt fragility. Pause again. Imagine farmer walking field, soil cracked, stalks brittle. He kneels, runs hand through dust. Children watch, quiet. Wind moves across empty plain, carrying silence. If you're still listening, notice how emptiness soothes, not cruel, but steady, folded into stillness. You don't need to track each harvest. Let sense of fragility drift like dust, carried, and so Egypt endured. For centuries, for millennia, river carried life. But climate reminded always, too much, too little, both dangerous. Each year uncertain, each flood both gift and threat. Pause once more. Picture evening upon riverbank. Sun sets gold, water glows, air cools. Families sit, sharing bread, fish, stories. Silence, soft, gentle. If you're still listening, notice how evening calm folds around you. You don't need to recall each dynasty, each famine. Let river drift, carrying all away. And you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did those who watched Nile each year sense fragility of life tied to water's whim? Or did they simply endure, waiting always for flood that might come too high or too low? Asterisk, you hear first, the low boom of waves striking stone, deep and resonant, rolling across the night air. The sea is restless, its surface black under clouds, its rhythm endless. Spray rises, carried by wind, sharp with salt, stinging your face. Wooden masts creak in harbors, ropes strain, ships groan against piers. Above, gulls cry, though even their voices sound uncertain, carried away by gusts. Pause here. Notice how sea air smells briny, heavy, mingled with pitch from boats, with faint smoke of lamps struggling against wind. You feel dampness in hair, cold pressing through cloak. Taste of salt upon lips. For coastal cities, water was both wealth and danger. Trade flowed upon waves, grain, wine, olive oil, spices. Harbors bustled, markets swelled, temples glittered with offerings. Yet storms could undo it all. Winds tore sails, waves smashed hulls, surges flooded streets, and seas, over centuries, crept higher, swallowing coasts once safe. If you're still listening, notice how repetition soothes wave after wave, strike after strike, endless. You don't need to recall each city's name. Let them drift like ships upon tide. Imagine now the port of Alexandria. Lighthouse rises tall, its beacon glowing faint, swallowed by rain. Docks crowded with ships tied fast, their hulls rising and falling with violent swells. Merchants shout, voices thin in storm. Crates spill, ampery shatter, grain soaks into sea. The air smells of wet wood, of resin, of fish. Pause again. Picture dawn after storm. Harbor wrecked, timbers floating, ropes frayed. Fishermen walk along shore, gathering fragments, faces hollow. Silence heavy, broken by gulls circling above. If you're still listening, notice how aftermath itself feels calming, quiet, after fury, hush following roar. You don't need to fix each ruin, let impression drift like foam dissolving on sand. Other cities too felt sea's burden. In Greece, storms swept coasts, ships lost, temples toppled by surges. In Phoenician ports, waves climbed higher, walls crumbled. In Rome itself, Asia's harbor strained, its piers battered, warehouses flooded. Pause once more. Imagine warehouse door burst open, ampery rolling, oil spreading across water. Smell sharpness of olives. Hear crash of waves. Feel cold water at ankles. If you're still listening, notice how detail folds gentle, not harsh, not urgent, but steady, soft. You don't need to follow each amphora. Let them sink like stones through water. Storms told more than single night's ruin. Over centuries, seas shifted, coastlines changed. Some cities drowned, others abandoned. Their harbors filled with sand, their docks buried beneath waves. Climate left marks, not sudden, but steady. Layers of silt, ruins beneath surf, walls eroded, grain. Pause again. Imagine diver descending through murky water, torch faint, ruins below, columns broken, streets paved, yet covered in sand, amphorae scattered like shells. Silence, vast, water pressing from all sides. If you're still listening, notice how underwater silence soothes, muffled, endless, folded into calm. You don't need to keep each ruin. Let them blur like shapes through tide. Ancient voices recorded storms. Writers told of ships shattered, harbors ruined, city swallowed. Yet, for those who lived it, storm was not storing. It was sound of roof torn, water rushing, children crying in dark. It was hunger after trade lost, silence of markets emptied, fear of sea. Pause once more. Picture family, huddled in stone house, door barred, roof shaking, fire faint, smoke curling low. Outside, wind howls, waves crash, walls tremble. Inside, silence, heavy with waiting. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself calms, breath held, time slow. You don't need to track each moment. Let hush of survival drift. But storms did not always mean ruin. They also meant change. Cities rebuilt higher, walls stronger, harbors shifted. Some moved inland, others adapted, trading less by sea, more by land. For survival meant bending, adjusting, living with sea's rhythm. Pause again. Imagine workers hauling stone, stacking walls, repairing docks. Here, hammer upon timber, voices chanting. Smell, pitch, sealing planks, sea breeze sharp. If you're still listening, notice how labor rhythm soothes, lifting, hammering, repeating. You don't need to recall each effort. Let sense of endurance drift, like tide returning. Yet, not all could endure. Some ports slipped into silence, their markets empty, their harbors filled with sand. Waves reclaimed them, leaving only ruins below surf. Travelers, centuries later, found stone beneath waves, streets where fish swam, amphorae where coral grew. Pause once more. Imagine walking shore at dusk. Waves lap softly now, tide calm. You see fragments washed ashore, tile, pottery, wood. Sky glows orange, sea darkens. Silence, vast, gentle. If you're still listening, notice how calm after storm soothes endless rhythm folded into hush. You don't need to hold each fragment. Let them dissolve like foam on sand. And so, coastal cities teach. Climate pressed not only in drought or frost, but in waves too high, storms too fierce, seas too endless. And people endured, rebuilt, or left, always listening to sea's breath. Pause again. Imagine horizon wide, waves endless, stars sharp above, air cool, salt heavy, silence folded with rhythm of surf. If you're still listening, notice how horizon itself feels calming, steady, infinite, soft. You don't need to recall each harbor's fate. Let them sink, like ruins beneath tide, and you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did those who watched storms sweep harbors sense sea's slow claim upon city? Or did they only wait, night by night, listening always for waves that might rise too high? Asterisk, you hear first the hum of cicadas, high and unbroken, vibrating in still air. The sun presses heavy, its light white and harsh, pouring upon marble that gleams too bright for eyes. Shadows shrink thin, clinging only to bases of columns, leaving courtyards bare beneath sky. The air itself feels solid, thick with heat, every breath warm, carrying faint smell of dust and stone. Pause here. Notice how silence folds beneath this soundscape. No rushing wind, no rushing water, only the constant drone of insects, the slow shuffle of feet upon flagstones. You taste dryness on your tongue, feel weight of sweat upon skin, sense time slowed by sun. Athens, a city of marble and thought, also endured summers fierce and unrelenting. Its fountains, once gurgling, ran low in heat. Its cisterns warmed, water tasting stale, metallic. In hills, grasses turned brittle, sheep wandered thinner, and olives, lifeblood of city, withered on branches when rains delayed too long. If you're still listening, notice how repetition itself calms the hum, the glare, the weight. You don't need to recall each temple or name. Let them blur like heat shimmer upon horizon. Imagine agora at midday. Merchant shade stalls with cloth, its fabric flapping faintly in hot breeze. Amphorae of oil line in rows, clay warm to touch. Fish smell sharp in heat, bread dry and cracking. Voices are low, transactions quick, for few linger in sun. The air smells of dust rising, mingled with faint sweetness of figs drying upon trays. Pause again. Picture philosophers seated beneath portico, scroll open, students gathered, their cloaks damp with sweat, their brows shaded by hand. The sound of cicadas fills pauses in speech, each phrase echoing slowly, melting in heat. If you're still listening, notice how slowness soothes, words stretched, silence long, rhythm unhurried. You don't need to grasp each thought. Let cadence drift like breeze moving gently. But heat was more than discomfort. Drought years pressed harsh. Grain harvests thinned, water rationed. Wells sunk deeper, ropes groaning, buckets splashing faint, yielding less. Families carried jars through dust, children trailing, footsteps slow. Hunger followed. Bread shrank, prices rose, voices in markets sharpened. Pause once more. Imagine family at hearth, pot nearly empty, steam thin, smell faint. Children silent, eyes down. Outside, cicadas still sing, endless, unbroken. If you're still listening, notice how fragility itself softens, not shouted, not urgent, but steady, folded into silence. You don't need to track each drought. Let sense of thirst drift, like dust carried out records, tell of unrest tied to hunger. Riots rising, voices pressing against rulers. Leaders promise relief, shipments of grain from islands, from far lands. But storms delayed ships, and harbors sometimes empty. Silence of hunger grew heavy. Pause again. Picture Pariah's harbor at dusk, piers crowded, families waiting. No sails on the horizon. Waves lap gently, mocking silence. Air smells of salt and tar. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself soothes, slow, unending, folded. You don't need to hold each famine. Let sense of longing drift like tide rising. And yet, life continued. Festivals still held, though offerings smaller. Torches glowed at night. Processions wound streets. Drums echoed. Voices sang. Even in drought, ritual endured, seeking balance, pleading for clouds. Pause once more. Imagine theater at dusk. Audience gathered. Shadows long. Actors speak lines, their voices carrying through hot air. Above, stars appear faint, while heat lingers upon stone. Silence folds between words. If you're still listening, notice how art itself soothes, stories weaving, rhythm steady. You don't need to follow each play. Let cadence drift, like chant in night. Scholars today read signs of climate in soils, in rings of trees, in ancient accounts. They trace years of scarcity, when sun burned to fierce, rains failed, hunger spread. They see how empires strained, how voices of people shifted, for climate pressed, not only in ice or flood, but also in heat to endless. Pause again. Imagine hills outside city, olive groves, thin, soil cracked. Shepherd walks slow, flock fewer, silence heavy. Dust rises with each step. If you're still listening, notice how image soothes, steady, calm, fragile. You don't need to remember each field. Let them dissolve, like haze in heat. And so Athens endured summers that pressed like weight. Stone gleamed, dust rose, hunger whispered. Yet people continued speaking, building, praying, enduring. For life meant balance with sky, uncertain, fragile, yet lived. Pause once more. Picture evening descending. Cicadas grow quieter. Air cools faint. Lamps glow in courtyards. Bread shared. Voices soft. The air smells of smoke and figs. Silence gentler now. If you're still listening, notice how dusk itself soothes. Weightlifting, calm, folding in. You don't need to hold each name. Let city drift. like stars appearing, and you were left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did Athenians, walking marble streets in blazing sun, sense fragility of life bound to sky's mercy? Or did they only endure, step by step, waiting always for rain that might not come? Asterisk, you hear the cry of gulls first, faint and sharp, circling above the harbor. The water glimmers under sun, light fractured into shards across waves. Yet, even by sea, the air is heavy, thick with warmth that clings to skin. On the stone docks, merchants move slowly, cloths wrapped tight around heads to shield from glare. The smell of tar, salt, and faint fish rises with heat, mixed with sharp temps of drying seaweed. Pause here. Notice how brightness presses in, light reflecting from water, stone, sand, no shade wide enough to soften it. You taste dryness at the back of your throat. Hear sandals scuff against stone. Time itself feels slowed, stretched beneath sky. Carthage, famed city of trade, lived always on the edge of desert. Its markets filled with spices, metals, silks, ivory, and oil. Ships brought goods from Spain, from Sardinia, from far Phoenician kin. Yet, for all wealth of harbor, cities still bowed before sun, when rains failed, when desert winds blew hot and unbroken. People felt fragility. If you're still listening, notice how rhythm itself soothes trade. Sun, silence, repeat. You don't need to recall each port or name. Let them blur, like sails vanishing in haze. Imagine water cisterns, vast and carved of stone, waiting to be filled. Rain from winter stored, guarded, rationed through months of drought. Men lowered buckets, ropes creaking, drops echoing in hollow dark. At times, echo was faint, water low. Silence inside cisterns told of fear. Pause again. Picture woman carrying a jar on hip, climbing steps from cistern, her back bent, her breath slow. Around her, air still, only faint cry of gull above. The jar heavy, but water inside warm, tasting of stone. If you're still listening, notice how effort itself soothes. Step, breath, pause. You don't need to hold each image clear. Let them drift like mirage upon sand. Heat-shaped crops too. Vineyards on hills wilted when rain stayed away. Fields turned brittle, soil cracked. Farmers cut losses, pressed what grapes they could, though wine thinner, harsher. Olives fared better, yet even their leaves curled in drought. Grain, essential for bread, shrank short, harvest light. In markets, loaves fewer, prices sharp, voices edged. Pause once more. Imagine stall of baker. Bread laid thin, crusts hard from old flour. The air smells faint of ash, sourdough. Buyers gather, voices tense, eyes wary. If you're still listening, notice how hunger itself folds, quiet, not loud, but steady. You don't need to mark each coin or price. Let sense of scarcity drift, like wind across dunes. Ancient accounts speak of reliance on trade. Carthage drew grain from fertile valleys inland, and in harsh years, from Sicily. Yet storms on sea delayed shipments, or rivals cut routes. Silence of empty harbors weighed heavy. People waited for sails that did not appear. Pause again. Picture coastline at dawn, horizon wide, bare of ships. Fishermen mend nets, gulls cry, waves lap faint. But trade ships absent, silence heavier than sound. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself soothes. Horizon empty, time stretched. You don't need to track each voyage. Let it blur like tide receding. And yet, resilience endured. Carthage built vast cisterns, aqueducts, storehouses. In times of plenty, they saved. In drought, they rationed. Wealth of trade balanced fragility of sky. Still, fear never absent. For beneath prosperity, memory of desert always near. Pause once more. Imagine night descending on city. Lamps flicker, shadows stretch. The air still warm, but cooler than day. Families gather, bread broken, oil poured. Outside, silence deep, stars sharp above desert edge. If you're still listening, notice how evening itself calms, light softer, heat easing. You don't need to hold each structure. Let them fade, like embers in dark dot. In later centuries, Romans too prized Carthage. They rebuilt, expanded, made it second city of empire. Yet still, desert pressed near. Climate shifts strained supply. Scholars reading soil see layers of dust, years when rains withdrew. People endured, but always with effort. For life here meant balance between sea and desert, water and thirst. Pause again. Picture shepherd beyond walls. His flock thin, dust rising with steps, air sharp with dryness, silence vast. He walks slow, head bent. If you're still listening, notice how image itself soothes, steady, fragile. You don't need to recall each detail. Let them drift, like heat shimmer across plain. Even rituals reflected climate. Temples offered sacrifice for rain, incense curling upward in hot stillness. Priests prayed to sky, to Baal-Haman, to gods of storm. Fires burned, smoke rising slow, air filled with resin's sharp scent. People gathered silent, waiting for clouds. Pause once more. Imagine altar glowing, smoke thick, drums low, voices chanting. Above, sky unbroken, blue, merciless. If you're still listening, notice how chanting itself calms rhythm, unending, sound folding. You don't need to follow each prayer. Let it drift, okay? Like smoke rising. Carthage thrived for centuries, yet climate always tested. Inscriptions record years of poor harvest, shipments delay, famine whispered. Traders sailed farther, seeking balance, but fragility remained. Desert waits, always patient, pressing close. Pause again. Imagine edge of city wall. Beyond, sand stretch, endless, silent. Wind moves faint, carrying dust. Inside wall, torches flicker. Outside, silence vast. If you're still listening, notice how silence itself soothes, vast, steady. You don't need to fear each drought. Let them dissolve, like footprints swept by wind. And so Carthage lived beneath burning sky. Ships came and went, markets filled and thinned. People endured. Yet always, beneath wealth, beneath stone, lay fear of thirst, of hunger, of desert pressing near. Pause once more. Picture dawn returning. Gold cries again. Sun rising, light, sharp upon harbor. The day begins as before. Heat already heavy. Silence folding once more. If you're still listening, notice how loop itself calms dawn, day, dusk, repeat. You don't need to hold each story. Let rhythm drift, like tide eternal, and you are left with reflection, soft, unresolved. Did Carthaginians walking docks in blazing sun sense fragility of city bound always to sky and sea? Or did they only endure, trusting ships would come, rain would fall, life would continue until one day it did not? Asterisk, you hear the faint toll of a bell echoing across a wide, crowded forum. The sound seems to drift lazily, softened by the heavy air of summer. Around you, the stones radiate warmth, their pale surfaces gleaming with light. Each step on the cobbles carries the heat back into your skin, as though the city itself is alive with fire beneath its foundations. Pause here. Notice how the brightness presses close, wrapping everything in its hold. You feel the air heavy, unmoving. A fly buzzes near your ear, then falls silent again. Rome, the heart of empire, rose as a city built upon water. Its aqueducts stretched like veins across countryside, arches carrying streams from distant hills. Water poured into fountains, baths, cisterns, pools. And yet, in summers when heat pressed down unbroken, when rivers slowed, fear of scarcity flickered through every district. If you're still listening, let yourself drift with the rhythm arches, streams, echoes. You don't need to hold each aqueduct's name. Let them blur like ripples dissolving in haze. Imagine a fountain in the Subura district. Children gather, clay cups in hand. The water trickles thinner than in spring, its stream faint, echoing against stone basin. Women wait with jars, speaking softly, voices weary. The scent of dust clings to their clothing. Behind them, alleys twist upward, lined with tall tenements where air hangs stagnant. Windows open, but offering little relief. Pause again. Picture a child lifting cup to lips. The water lukewarm, tasting faintly of minerals. Around him, silence broken only by a creak of pulley, the bark of a stray dog. If you're still listening, notice how thirst itself feels steady, not sharp, but constant. You don't need to follow each detail of street. Let it fade, like shadow beneath midday sun. In the great forums, senators still gathered beneath porticos. Marble columns offered shade, but air inside felt thick, carrying smell of sweat and perfume. Scrolls were read, speeches given, though voices grew slower, words dragging as heat deepened. Outside, vendors fanned themselves with palm leaves, their stalls heavy with wilting herbs. Fish smelling stronger than usual, bread staler in the afternoon sun. Pause once more. Imagine that marketplace. The air heavy with spice and sweat, shadows long and thin. Flies circle lazily, wings glinting in shafts of light. If you're still listening, notice how markets themselves move slowly, trade sluggish, time stretched. You don't have to remember each smell. Let them drift, like scent of basil carried on faint breeze. For ordinary Romans, survival meant finding coolness. Bathhouses filled not only for cleansing, but for relief. Tepid pools eased heat from bidets. Calderia abandoned for frigidaria. Men and women lingered longer, their conversations hushed, skin glistening with water. But baths demanded supply, and in years of drought, gates closed early, or fees rose. Silence of empty pools spoke louder than voices. Pause again. Picture marble basin, waterline lower than carved rim. A few drops glisten, trickle faint. The echo of water vanishes into stillness. If you're still listening, notice how emptiness itself soothes, pool shallow, silence wide. You don't need to picture each column. Let the scene fade, like ripples settling into calm. Rome's emperors knew water was power. They repaired aqueducts, built new ones, ordered fountains, flowing even during hardship, for empty fountains meant unrest. Crowds gathered around public spouts, muttering when streams slowed. A hush would spread, broken only by cough, by sandals against stone. Fear of thirst touched rich and poor alike. Pause once more. Imagine night falling on a fountain. Torchlight flickers, shadows stretch. The stream of water glimmers, thin but constant. People linger, filling jars before curfew, their faces half hidden in glow. If you're still listening, notice how night itself calms, cooler, softer. You don't need to hold the politics of each emperor. Let them dissolve, like firelight fading in Ashdod. Yet, even palaces bent beneath heat. In the Palatine halls, servants waved great fans of peacock feathers. Perfumed oils were burned to mask closeness of air. Pools were kept filled for patricians to dip their hands, but outside their gates, tenements smothered in heat. Wooden beams creaked in attic rooms, straw mattresses damp with sweat. Families lay awake, listening to city hum, voices carrying through thin walls. Pause again. Imagine that tenement at night. A baby crying faint, mother murmuring softly. Outside, the muffled call of watchmen echoes, steady as heartbeat. If you're still listening, notice how layers of sound soothe baby, mother, watchman, silence. You don't need to recall each voice. Let them drift like echoes in distance. Historians trace years of strain. Inscriptions mark appeals for grain. Records note price rises during long summers. Ships carrying grain from Egypt or Africa delayed. Their sails became in stagnant air. In harbors, crowds grew anxious, eyes scanning horizon for ships that did not appear. Pause once more. Picture Ostia's docks at dawn. Crates stacked, gulls circling, but horizon bare. Waves lap slow, air heavy with seaweed and tar. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself soothes. Horizon empty, time slow. You don't have to follow each ship's fate. Let it blur, like tide withdrawing. And yet, resilience endured. Romans adapted with shaded porticos, awnings stretched across forums, gardens watered at night. Ice was carried from mountains, stored in pits for cooling wine, though luxury for wealthy only. Children splashed in fountains when guards absent. Priests prayed in temples, incense curling upward, smoke lost against blue sky. Pause again. Imagine temple steps at noon. Incense burning, scent sharp, air quivering with heat. Shadows minimal, bells faint. If you're still listening, notice how ritual itself calms. Smoke rising, voices low. You don't need to recall each prayer. Let it drift, like cloud dissolving. But fragility never disappeared. Drought meant hunger. Hunger meant unrest. Riots broke in markets when grain scarce. Aqueducts cut by enemy armies left districts dry. In silence of empty basins, empire's power felt thinner, its reach more fragile. Pause once more. Picture basin, empty dust gathering at bottom. A child peers in, sees nothing but reflection of his face in faint water. Silence, vast, unsettling. If you're still listening, notice how reflection itself calms image, soft, fading. You don't need to dwell on each famine. Let them fade, like shadows melting at dusk. So Rome endured, vast yet vulnerable, rich yet fragile. Its stones still stand, aqueducts arch and silent against sky. But listen close, and you may still hear echoes of thirst, of silence when fountains slowed, of prayers whispered beneath burning sun. Pause again. Picture Rome at dawn. The air cooled for a moment, light, gentle on marble. People stir, filling jars quickly before heat rises once more. If you're still listening, notice how dawn itself soothes, beginning again, cycle, repeating. You don't need to hold every season. Let rhythm carry, like waves of time, and you are left with a question, soft, unresolved. Did Romans walking beneath arches sense how much of empire rested not on legions or marble, but on thin streams of water falling into basins, fragile against burning sky? Asterisk, you hear the soft rush of water first, not the delicate trickle of a fountain, nor the crash of surf upon stone, but a broad, steady murmur, deep and unending. It is the sound of the Tigris, the Euphrates, rivers wide as time itself. Their currents move slow, gleaming in sunlight, carrying silt and promise. The smell is earthy, damp, full of fertility. And yet, if you wait long enough, those same rivers change tone. Their calm murmur swells into a roar, swollen with sudden rain from distant mountains, tearing banks apart, surging into villages. Pause here. Notice how one sound becomes too quiet and dangerous, nourishing and threatening. You hear water slapping gently against reeds, and then imagine it swelling, spilling, carrying away walls of mud brick. If you're still listening, let yourself drift with the rhythm. You don't need to remember each river's name. It is enough to imagine water itself, endless, restless, alive. Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, gave birth to some of the world's earliest cities. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Babylon. Here, fields spread green in spring, crops rising tall from dark, fertile soil. Irrigation canals carried life from riverbanks to orchards and gardens. Dates hung heavy from palms, barley bent golden in wind. Sheep grazed upon floodplains. Yet always there was risk. 4 rivers were both gift and burden, both blessing and threat. Pause again. Imagine a farmer standing at dawn. He holds a wooden hoe, his bare feet in damp earth. Around him, barley rustles softly, birds call above. But beyond the field, he watches river's edge, uncertain whether tomorrow's flow will nurture or drown. If you're still listening, notice how the thought itself calms, work steady, fear steady. You don't need to hold each crop in mind. Let them drift, like reeds bending in current. The people of these cities built canals like veins across plain. Men dug ditches, lined them with reeds, guided water into measured flow. Villages maintained them communally, for without shared labor, ditches clogged. Water flooded wrong fields, land turned to salt. Laws were written in clay to govern water's use. Hammurabi's code decreed fines if a farmer failed to tend his canal, flooding another's field. For survival meant balance, cooperation, vigilance. Pause once more. Picture scribes pressing wedge-shaped signs into damp clay. The air smells of earth and smoke. Tablets dry in sun, hardening into memory. Around them, silence of court, broken by low voices of farmers disputing water rights. If you're still listening, notice how law itself soothes order against chaos, clay against flood. You don't need to memorize each statute. Let them blur, like writing, worn by centuries. And yet, despite rules, floods came sudden. In spring, snow melted from Anatolian mountains, rushing south. Waters swelled beyond banks, sweeping away huts of reed and mud brick, leaving fields buried in silt. Sometimes, silt renewed fertility. Other times, floods came too strong, carving gullies, drowning crops, scattering seed. Families rebuilt, walls mended, dikes patched. Pause again. Imagine standing atop city wall, watching horizon. Clouds gather, sky darkens, thunder murmurs. Then water spreads across plain, swift and silent, swallowing paths. If you're still listening, notice how storm itself calms, distant, inevitable. You don't need to picture each flood clearly. Let them merge, like waves in dream. Droughts came too. Years when rivers shrank, canals ran low, cattle bawled in thirst. Dust-coated leaves, air shimmered with heat. Temples filled with worshippers praying for rain, priests burning incense, offering sacrifice. Smoke curled upward, disappearing into sky empty of clouds. Crops withered, prices rose. In markets, bread thinned, voices hushed. Pause once more. Imagine the stillness of drought. Streets hot, air heavy. A child sips water slowly from clay cup, lips cracked. Around her, silence wide. If you're still listening, notice how stillness itself soothes. Nothing moves, nothing changes. You don't need to remember each famine. Let them fade, like footprints on parched dust. Mesopotamian kings understood fragility. Their titles proclaimed them shepherds of people, guardians of canals. Reliefs carved into stone show kings smiting enemies, but also show them pouring water from jugs, symbol of life. Rulers were measured not only by conquests, but by harvests, by irrigation maintained, by temples fed. When famine struck, people murmured that gods withheld blessing, that king had failed. Pause again. Picture palace courtyard. King stands robed, priest beside him. Water poured from golden vessel into carved channel. The water glistens, pooling briefly before sinking into earth. Around him, crowd silent, watching. If you're still listening, notice how ritual itself calms. Gesture repeated, meaning eternal. You don't need to dwell on each rain. Let them drift, like names on broken tablet. Archaeologists find traces of salt in soils where canals once spread. Irrigation over centuries raised salts to surface poisoning fields. Cities that once thrived shrank, their walls abandoned, their temples silent. Climate alone did not destroy them, but it pressed close, joining with war, with trade shifts, with time. Pause once more. Imagine cracked plain, once green. White salt crystals gleam against soil. Wind moves faint, carrying dust. In distance, ruins rise, walls eroded by centuries. If you're still listening, notice how ruin itself calms empty, still, unchanging. You don't need to recall each layer of soil. Let them fade, like echoes dissolved in sand. And yet, resilience lived long. Cities endured for millennia, adjusting, rebuilding, adapting. Farmers shifted crops, digging new canals, planting dates that tolerated drought. Communities prayed, celebrated, sang hymns to rivers as mothers of life. Even in hardship, songs rose. Pause again. Imagine voices at night beside water. A flute plays, drums beat faint. Stars glimmer above plain. The river flows slow, glistening in moonlight as people sing of life that endures. If you're still listening, notice how music itself soothes, steady, low, endless. You don't need to follow each lyric. Let them drift like current beneath stars. And so Mesopotamia, cradle of cities, lived always between blessing and burden. Water gave rise to walls, temples, writing, empire. But water also carried threat, always near, always restless. Pause once more. Picture dawn upon river. Mist rises, reeds glisten, birds call. The current moves steady, ancient, unbroken. If you're still listening, notice how dawn itself calms light, soft, river steady. You don't need to hold every dynasty. Let time itself flow like water eternal, and you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved. Did the people of Mesopotamia know, as they stood upon river banks, that the very waters which gave them life also carried the seeds of their fragility? Or did they only live day by day, trusting the flow would continue until it did not? Asterisk, you hear it before you see it. The low murmur of water moving across reeds, wide and steady, carrying the weight of an entire land. The Nile drifts through silence, its surface broken only by ripples. Scent, a mixture of wet earth, lotus, and faint decay of vegetation. As the sun climbs, the river glitters, each beam of light caught upon wave like metal hammered into brightness. Along the banks, children laugh faintly, their voices soft as they splash near edges, though even their joy is tinged with caution. For Egyptians knew always that this water was not only play, not only life, it was fate itself. Pause here. Notice how river and silence entwine. You feel damp air rising, hear rustle a papyrus, smell clay warming in sun. The Nile is near, and time feels slower beneath its endless flow. If you're still listening, let yourself drift with rhythm, flow, silence, glimmer. You don't need to remember each bend of river. It is enough to feel how water itself carried kingdoms. Each year, the flood came. Rains from Ethiopian highlands swelled tributaries, pouring northward until plains of Egypt drowned beneath dark, fertile silt. To farmers, this flood was breath of God's. It renewed soil, restored fertility, prepared fields for grain that fed world. When flood came high and steady, harvest was abundant. Granaries filled, bread cheap, people content. When flood failed, famine whispered. The river gave, and the river withheld. Pause again. Imagine villagers waiting, the air still, horizon wide, eyes searching south for first brown surge of water. A hush spreads, the kind that holds both hope and fear. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself soothes, horizon, quiet, river, absent. You don't need to know each measure of flood. Let them blur, like ripples lost in current. The Egyptians built nilometers, stone staircases cut into riverbanks, marked with lines, numbers, prayers. Priests descended, measuring depth, announcing height. A high mark meant abundance, a low mark meant hunger, and each word they spoke carried weight of survival. Incense burned, offerings given, for flood was sacred, its rhythm divine. Pause once more. Picture priest descending steps, water lapping at sandals. He bends, touches surface, feels coolness, then lifts gaze to carved marks. Around him, silence holds breath. If you're still listening, notice how ritual itself calms. Just repeat it, voice low. You don't need to hold each number. Let them drift, like silt upon current. Temples rose in reverence to river. Hymns praised Hapi, spirit of flood, bringer of fertility. Sculptures carved with water lilies, fish, jars overflowing. Festivals greeted the flood, drums sounding, incense curling, people rejoicing as waters spread across plains. Yet, beneath joy lived unease, for too much water drowned villages, swept away dikes, collapsed mud brick walls. Too little water brought cracks in soil, bread scarce, famine near. Pause again. Imagine celebration at river's edge. Flutes play, dancers sway, smoke rises sweet from altars. Yet in distance, some farmers watch fields anxiously, knowing joy can turn to fear if water fails. If you're still listening, notice how contrast itself calms joy and fear, sound and silence. You don't need to choose which truth matters more. Let both drift like twin currents. Famine years are remembered in texts, in inscriptions carved deep into stone. One stela speaks of 7 years of low flood, when people starved, when grain prices soared, when even officials went hungry. Stories told of neighbors stealing from neighbors, families leaving villages. Such memory echoed across generations, warning that river's gift was fragile. Pause once more. Picture cracked fields beneath the sun. The soil, white, brittle. A farmer kneels, sifting dust through fingers. Around him, silence wide, broken only by crow's cry. If you're still listening, notice how stillness itself calms soil, empty, time slow. You don't need to remember each famine. Let them fade, like hieroglyphs eroded by wind. Kings proclaimed themselves masters of river, boasting of canals dug, dikes raised, fields restored. Reliefs show pharaohs offering jars of water to gods, symbol of balance maintained. But even kings could not command flood. Their rule shone bright when harvests abundant, but dimmed when bread scarce. People murmured, priests prayed louder, trust frayed. Pause again. Imagine temple court at noon. Pharaoh stands tall, crown gleaming, priests chanting, incense thick. He pours water upon altar, gesture grand. But above, sky empty, horizon dry. If you're still listening, notice how image itself calms. Ceremony vast, silence larger. You don't need to judge each king. Let them drift, like names fading in tombs. Granaries were lifeline. In years of plenty, they filled jars of grain stacked high, guarded by officials. In years of want, gates opened slowly, grain measured, distributed with care or corruption. Crowds gathered, waiting in silence, broken by cough, by low murmur. Hunger made voices sharp, eyes hollow. Pause once more. Picture granary courtyard. The air dry, dust swirling. Officials tally grain with reed pens. Outside, families wait, children leaning against mothers, too tired to cry. If you're still listening, notice how hunger itself calms when softened into sound. Murmur, silence, sigh. You don't need to recall each number of sacks. Let them vanish, like chaff carried by wind. The Nile shaped more than harvest. It shaped rhythm of life. Villages worked when flood withdrew, fields planted, canals repaired. Boats drifted along channels, carrying stone, timber, fish, papyrus. Songs rose with labor, oars dipping in rhythm. When flood returned, fields drowned again. People turned to crafts, to weaving, to ritual, to waiting. Year after year, cycle unbroken. Pause again. Imagine boat gliding across water. Oars dip, splash, rise. The smell of wet wood, fish, and lotus drifts and breeze. If you're still listening, notice how repetition itself calms, dip, splash, drift. You don't need to hold each season clear. Let them blur, like waves folding into one another. And yet, fragility lingered. Climate shifts, altered floods, stretched famine years. Desert crept closer, winds carrying sand into once green fields. Temples prayed louder, kings built higher, but balance grew strained. Egypt endured for millennia, but always beneath the breath of Nile, always bound to its rise and fall. Pause once more. Picture desert at edge of floodplain. Sand stretches, vast dunes glowing beneath sun. Beyond, river glimmers, thin line of life against emptiness. If you're still listening, notice how contrast itself calms sand and water, silence and flow. You don't need to resolve which endures, let them remain, like twin truths in stillness. And so, Egypt thrived, survived, faded, but never escaped the river's hold. Even now, ruins rise beside its banks, carved stone, watching water drift as it always has. Listen, and you may still hear echoes of hymns sung to flood, prayers whispered in famine, silence of fields cracked by drought. Pause again. Imagine twilight upon Nile. Water glows, copper, air cools, birds call soft. Villagers light lamps, shadows lengthen, smoke curls faint from hearts. The river flows, endless, indifferent. If you're still listening, notice how twilight itself calms, day softening, night arriving. You don't need to follow each dynasty. Let time dissolve, like starlight mirrored in current, and you are left with a reflection, soft, unresolved, dead Egyptians as they stood upon riverbank at dusk. Sense how fragile their plenty was, or did they only trust that Nile would rise again, as it always had, until one year it did not. Asterisk, you hear the faint patter first, not the endless rush of a broad river, nor the thunderous roar of a flood, but the gentle beginning of rain striking baked earth. It is a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers on clay. The smell rises almost instantly, soil darkened by water, sharp and sweet at once. The monsoon has arrived, and with it, life itself. For in the Indus Valley, rains were the turning of the year, the thin line between hunger and survival. Pause here. Notice how sound folds into scent. You feel drops cooled against skin, air damp with promise. Around you, silence breaks into rustle, splash, murmur. If you're still listening, let yourself drift with the rhythm, rain, scent, breath. You don't need to hold each drop in mind. It is enough to feel how rain alone reshaped cities. Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, and countless smaller towns rose upon these plains. Their streets laid in careful grids, their drains cut with precision, their bricks baked strong in kilns. Civilization thrived here, measured by balance between floods and drought, between river and sky. Each year, people waited for monsoon. If rains came steady, canals filled, crops grew, granaries swelled. If rains faltered, silence spread, wells dried, hunger followed. Pause again. Imagine farmers standing in parched field, scanning horizon. Air shimmers, soil cracked, dust rising with each step. He waits for clouds that do not come. His hope stretched thin as season lingers. If you're still listening, notice how waiting itself calms horizon empty, silence wide. You don't need to picture each harvest. Let them fade, like clouds dissolving in heat. The Indus was mighty, but also unpredictable. Fed by Himalayan snow, its waters swelled with rain. In years of abundance, floodplains spread green, rice paddies shimmered, barley rose golden. In harsh years, waters withdrew, land shrank, settlements strained. Archaeologists trace shifting riverbeds, dry channels where water once flowed. Cities that have thrived stood suddenly distant from lifeblood, their wells deeper, their fields barren. Pause once more. Picture dry riverbed beneath sun. Pebbles gleam, dust swirls. The silence heavier than the sound of water ever was. If you're still listening, notice how absence itself soothes emptiness, steady, unbroken. You don't need to recall each river's path. Let them blur, like lines erased by sand. In Mohenjo-daro, great baths and drains reveal ritual and rhythm. People washed not only to cleanse body, but to honor cycles of water, to bind themselves with flow of life. Yet, in seasons when wells sank low, silence filled these baths. Imagine tiled basin, waterline faint, echoes hollow. Priests poured jars of water in prayer, but gods of sky remained silent. Pause again. Picture empty bath at dusk. Light fades, shadows stretch. The smell of dust replaces scent of water. Steps descend into silence. If you're still listening, notice how emptiness itself comes. Basin, quiet time suspended. You don't need to hold each brick clear. Let them fade, like outlines in mist. Monsoons, when late or weak, rippled through entire society. Farmers starved, granaries emptied, trade thinned. Boats, once heavy with goods, sat idle. Cities turned inward, their markets hushed, the streets less crowded. Archaeological layers show abandonment, bricks crumbling, houses empty. Scholars trace climate shift, monsoons weakening over centuries, rivers changing course, prosperity frayed, people dispersed. Pause once more. Imagine silent street of Harappa. Doorways empty, dust gathers. A dog trots past, its paws leaving faint prints. Wind moves softly through abandoned alleys. If you're still listening, notice how silence itself calms, streets hushed, time unmoving. You don't need to recall each reason for decline. Let them drift, like leaves carried by wind. And yet, resilience endured in smaller ways. Villages persisted beyond great cities. People adapting, planting where they could, digging deeper for wells, herding cattle along shifting routes. Survival shrank, but did not vanish. Even when monsoons weakened, people still listened for first drops, still smelled soil awakened beneath rain. Pause again. Imagine small hut in parched field. Family gathers at doorway, watching horizon. At last, cloud breaks, rain falls steady, earth darkens. Children laugh, parents smile, faint. For now, life continues. If you're still listening, notice how renewal itself calms, drops steady, soil alive. You don't need to mark each adaptation. Let them fade, like ripples merging into flood. The Indus Valley remains mysterious. Its script undeciphered, its stories half heard through ruins. But climate's hand is clear. Flood and drought, monsoon and silence wove themselves into fabric of survival. People built, thrived, dispersed, leaving behind bricks, drains, streets, and silence. Pause once more. Picture great mound of Mohenjo-daro beneath twilight. Bricks glow faint, shadows stretch long. The river far away, silent. Air carries scent of dust. If you're still listening, notice how twilight itself calms, day softens, ruins endure. You don't need to unravel each mystery. Let it rest, like unread script carved in clay. And you are left with reflection, soft and unresolved. Did the people of the Indus, as they waited for monsoon, sense that silence of sky might one day last not for a season, but for centuries, until fields emptied, cities hushed, voices gone, leaving only rain itself to remember them?